The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned warehouse district as Marcus Thompson adjusted his military cap and surveyed the makeshift shooting range. Rusty shipping containers served as backstops, and paper targets fluttered in the gentle breeze at various distances. This wasn't the pristine facility he'd trained at during his 15 years in the Marine Corps, but it would do for what he had in mind. Marcus had returned to his hometown of Millfield 3 months ago, carrying more than just his duffel bag. The weight of memories from 2 tours in Afghanistan pressed down on his shoulders like an invisible burden. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by phantom sounds of gunfire and the faces of soldiers who hadn't made it home. The Veterans Administration had suggested he find a healthy outlet, something to channel his restless energy and connect with his community. That's when the idea struck him. Millfield had always been a town where hunting was as common as Sunday church. But there was no proper shooting club, no place for young people to learn marksmanship safely. Marcus decided to start a youth shooting program, hoping to teach discipline, focus, and respect for firearms while finding his own path back to civilian life. Word had spread quickly through the small town of 8,000 residents. The local newspaper ran a small article, and Marcus had posted flyers at the hardware store, the diner, and the community center. He expected maybe a handful of teenagers to show up for the first meeting, probably boys whose fathers hunted deer every fall. As he finished setting up the safety equipment and checking the rifles he'd borrowed from various townspeople, Marcus heard the sound of approaching vehicles. A dusty pickup truck pulled into the gravel lot, followed by a sedan, and then an old station wagon. Car doors slammed, and voices carried across the morning air as parents dropped off their children. The first to approach was Jake Morrison, a lanky 17-year-old with sandy hair and an eager grin. His father owned the local auto repair shop, and Jake had been talking about joining the military after graduation. Behind him came 2 younger boys, twins named Danny and David Chun, whose family had moved to Millfield when their father took a job at the new manufacturing plant on the edge of town. "This is so cool, Mr. Thompson," Jake said, his eyes wide as he took in the setup. "My dad says you were a sniper in the Marines." Marcus winced slightly at the word sniper. He'd been a designated marksman, and the distinction mattered to him, though he understood why civilians used the terms interchangeably. "I was a precision shooter," he corrected gently. "And today we're going to start with the basics of firearm safety. Nothing fancy." More teenagers arrived over the next few minutes. Sarah Beth Williams, the mayor's daughter, surprised Marcus by showing up with her own .22 rifle case. Tommy Rodriguez brought his younger sister Maria, explaining that their grandfather had taught them to shoot tin cans behind the family farm. By 10 o'clock, Marcus counted 14 young people ranging in age from 13 to 18. As he began his safety briefing, explaining the fundamental rules of firearm handling, Marcus noticed a small figure sitting alone on the tailgate of an old Ford truck parked at the far edge of the lot. The distance made it difficult to make out details, but the person appeared to be watching the group intently. "Rule number 1, Marcus announced, holding up a finger. "Every firearm is always loaded, even when you know it isn't. Rule number 2, never point a gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. Rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Rule number 4, be sure of your target and what's beyond it." The teenagers listened with varying degrees of attention. Jake hung on every word, while the Chun twins whispered to each other in Mandarin until Marcus's stern look quieted them. Sarah Beth nodded knowingly, clearly having heard these rules before. After 30 minutes of safety instruction and basic rifle handling, Marcus decided it was time for a demonstration. He'd planned this carefully, knowing that teenage attention spans required something dramatic to maintain interest. "Before we start with the fundamentals of shooting position and sight alignment," he announced, "I want to show you what's possible with proper training and practice." He gestured toward a series of targets he'd set up at progressively greater distances. The closest was at 50 yards, nothing challenging for an experienced shooter. But at 200 yards, barely visible to the naked eye, hung a playing card. "Who here thinks they're a good shot?" Marcus asked, scanning the group. Several hands went up tentatively. I got a deer last season at about 100 yards, Jake offered. That's excellent, Marcus replied. Hunting requires real skill. But I want to show you something that demonstrates why we never stop learning, why we always respect the weapon and the sport. He shouldered his own rifle, a civilian version of the M40 he'd carried overseas. The familiar weight felt good in his hands, and, for a moment, the warehouse faded away. He was back on a ridge outside Kandahar, watching over his squad as they moved through hostile territory. The shot was routine by his standards. Marcus controlled his breathing, felt his heartbeat, and squeezed the trigger during his natural respiratory pause. The playing card at 200 yards disappeared in a small puff of paper fragments. The teenagers erupted in excited chatter, but their voices seemed distant to Marcus. Instead of satisfaction, he felt only emptiness. The precision that had once filled him with quiet pride now felt mechanical, disconnected from any meaningful purpose. That was incredible, Sarah Beth breathed. How did you learn to shoot like that? Before Marcus could answer, a new voice cut through the group's excitement. It came from behind them, clear and unexpected. Any sharpshooters here? Everyone turned toward the sound. The figure from the truck had approached while they were watching the demonstration. Marcus's first impression was of smallness and stillness. The speaker was a girl, probably 15 or 16, with shoulder-length dark hair and serious brown eyes. She wore faded jeans, worn sneakers, and a plain gray t-shirt that hung loosely on her thin frame. What struck Marcus most was her posture, perfectly straight, balanced like someone accustomed to carrying weight. "Excuse me," Marcus said, uncertain he'd heard correctly. The girl repeated her question, louder this time, though her expression remained neutral. "Any sharpshooters here?" Her gaze swept over the group of teenagers, who had fallen silent, then settled on Marcus. "I heard the shot. Saw the card." Jake laughed nervously. "Well, Mr. Thompson here is pretty amazing. He just showed us." The girl's attention remained fixed on Marcus. 200 yards, stationary target, no wind, good lighting conditions. She paused, tilting her head slightly. Standard shot for someone with proper training. Something in her tone made Marcus take a closer look. There was knowledge in her words, the casual confidence that came from experience rather than bravado. "You have shooting experience?" Instead of answering directly, the girl walked to the truck and returned carrying a long, hard case. She set it down carefully on a wooden table Marcus had brought for equipment, then looked up at him. "May I?" Marcus found himself nodding, though he wasn't sure why. The girl's fingers worked the case latches with practiced efficiency, revealing a rifle that made several of the teenagers step back involuntarily. It was a Remington 700, heavily modified with a custom stock, upgraded barrel, and high-end optics. The weapon was clearly well-maintained, its surfaces showing the subtle signs of regular use rather than display case storage. This wasn't a hunting rifle or a sporting weapon. This was a precision instrument. "Where did you get that?" Sarah Beth whispered, voicing the question everyone was thinking. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she began a methodical process that Marcus recognized immediately. The ritual of a serious shooter preparing for a long-distance shot. She checked the rifle's action, examined the scope mounting, and pulled a small notebook from her pocket to consult wind and environmental data she'd apparently been recording. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. There's only one family in Millfield that might produce a teenager with this level of shooting equipment and expertise. "Emma," she replied without looking up from her preparations. "Emma Hartwell." Marcus's breath caught. James Hartwell had been a legend in military sniper circles, a Marine who'd served 3 tours in Iraq and earned a reputation for impossible shots under extreme conditions. Marcus had never met him, but every precision shooter knew the stories. Hartwell had died in a training accident 5 years ago, leaving behind a wife and daughter. "Your father was James Hartwell," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. For the first time, Emma's composure flickered. Her hands stilled on the rifle, and something painful crossed her features before disappearing behind her neutral mask. Yes. The warehouse had gone completely quiet. Even the Chun twins had stopped whispering. Emma resumed her preparations, loading a single round into the rifle's chamber with movements that were almost reverential. "What are you planning to shoot at?" Marcus asked, though he had a growing suspicion. Emma pointed to a target he'd set up, but not mentioned to the group. A steel plate at 400 yards, barely visible as a glint of metal in the distance. That. Marcus shook his head. "Emma, that's an extremely difficult shot. The conditions aren't ideal, and with all these people around, I've made harder ones," she said simply, settling into a prone position behind the rifle. What followed was a masterclass in precision shooting that left Marcus struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. Emma's setup was flawless. Her body formed a stable platform, her breathing controlled, her grip consistent. She spent nearly 5 minutes studying the target through her scope, making minute adjustments, and waiting for wind conditions. The shot, when it came, was a surprise even to Marcus. Emma squeezed the trigger with no visible preparation, no dramatic pause. 400 yards away, the steel plate rang like a bell as the bullet found its center. The silence that followed was profound. 14 teenagers and one veteran Marine stared at a slight girl who had just demonstrated shooting skills that would be impressive at a military sniper school. Emma calmly worked the rifle's bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge, then began breaking down her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown in setting up. "How?" Jake finally managed to ask. "How did you do that?" Emma paused in her work, glancing up at the faces surrounding her. For just a moment, Marcus saw past her careful control to the grief and loneliness underneath. "My father taught me," she said quietly. Before he died, Marcus felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. The Hartwell property was isolated, surrounded by hills that would provide natural backstops for long-range shooting. James Hartwell would have wanted to pass on his skills to his daughter to create a connection that transcended the military world where he'd spent so much of his life. "How often do you practice?" Marcus asked. "Every day," Emma replied, closing her rifle case. "Weather permitting. Alone." Emma's nod was barely perceptible. Always alone. Marcus looked around at the group of teenagers, all of whom were staring at Emma with mixtures of awe, confusion, and something approaching fear. He understood their reaction. Emma's skills were far beyond anything they'd expected to encounter at a small-town shooting club. But what struck him most was the isolation radiating from this girl who could outshoot most professional soldiers. "Why did you come here today?" he asked. Emma stood, slinging her rifle case over her shoulder with practiced ease. "I heard about the shooting club. I thought." She trailed off, seeming to lose confidence for the first time since her dramatic demonstration. "I thought maybe there would be others who understood." "Understood what?" Marcus prompted gently. Emma's eyes met his, and in them he saw something he recognized, the look of someone carrying knowledge and experiences that set them apart from their peers. What's like to be good at something that scares people? Before Marcus could respond, Emma was walking back toward the old Ford truck. The other teenagers watched in silence as she drove away, leaving behind only the lingering scent of gunpowder and a dozen questions that Marcus wasn't sure how to answer. Jake was the first to speak. "Was that real? Did she really just make that shot?" Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. In all his years of military service, he'd met perhaps a dozen shooters with Emma's level of natural ability. To find that skill in a teenage girl in rural America was almost unprecedented. But more than her marksmanship, it was Emma's obvious isolation that concerned him. "That was impressive shooting," he said finally, addressing the group. "But I want everyone to remember that what Emma did today was the result of years of intensive training. She didn't start with 400-yard shots, and neither will any of you." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of basic instruction and tentative first shots at close-range targets. The other teenagers gradually regained their enthusiasm, but Marcus found his thoughts continually drifting to Emma Hartwell. There had been something in her eyes when she mentioned being good at something that scared people, a depth of understanding that spoke to experiences beyond her years. As the session wound down and parents began arriving to pick up their children, Marcus made a decision. Emma had approached them for a reason, even if she hadn't been able to articulate it clearly. Whatever had brought her to the warehouse that morning, he suspected she needed something more than just a place to demonstrate her shooting skills. The question was whether he was the right person to help her find it. His own struggles with civilian life were far from resolved, and he wasn't sure he had anything to offer a girl who had clearly surpassed him in raw shooting ability. But something about Emma's quiet desperation reminded him of his own lost feelings since returning home. Maybe they could help each other figure out what came next. As he packed up the equipment and prepared to leave, Marcus glanced once more toward the spot where the steel target still hung, a small dent marking where Emma's bullet had found its mark. In all his years of shooting, both in training and in combat, he'd rarely seen such precision under pressure. More importantly, he'd never seen such skill wrapped in such profound loneliness. The drive home gave Marcus time to think about what he'd witnessed and what it might mean for both Emma and his struggling shooting program. One thing was certain: tomorrow was going to bring questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Questions about a girl who could outshoot Marines, about why she'd been training alone, and about what role, if any, he should play in whatever came next. The empty warehouse behind him held the echo of that single, perfect shot, a sound that would reshape everything Marcus thought he knew about teaching young people to shoot. The call came at 7 in the morning, jolting Marcus from another restless night. The caller ID showed the number for Millfield High School, and Principal Watson's voice carried an unusual tension. "Marcus, I need to speak with you about yesterday's shooting demonstration. Could you come in this morning before classes start?" An hour later, Marcus sat in Watson's cramped office, surrounded by motivational posters and stacks of administrative paperwork. The principal, a thin man in his 50s who'd never served in the military, fidgeted with his coffee mug as he spoke. "Several parents called me last night," Watson began. "They're concerned about what their children witnessed at your shooting club. Apparently, there was a girl there who demonstrated some rather advanced skills." Marcus chose his words carefully. Emma Hartwell attended the session. "She's an experienced shooter." The parents used words like disturbing and frightening. One mother said her daughter came home talking about a girl with a sniper rifle who could kill people from far away. Watson leaned forward. "Marcus, I supported your shooting program because I believe it would teach discipline and responsibility. But if it's going to attract unstable individuals or create safety concerns—" "Emma isn't unstable," Marcus interrupted. "She's skilled. There's a difference." Watson's expression remained skeptical. "A teenage girl who owns military-grade weapons and practices shooting every day? That doesn't concern you." Marcus felt a familiar frustration rising. It was the same reaction he'd encountered repeatedly since returning to civilian life: fear and misunderstanding of anything connected to military skills or experience. Principal Watson, with respect, Emma's father was a decorated Marine sniper. He taught his daughter to shoot before he died. Her skills are the result of proper training, not instability. But surely you can understand the parents' concerns. This is a small town, Marcus. People aren't accustomed to that level of lethality in a teenager. The word lethality hung in the air between them. Marcus recognized the subtext. In the civilian world, excellence in shooting was often viewed as synonymous with potential violence. It was a prejudice he'd faced himself, the assumption that military training automatically made someone dangerous or unpredictable. "I'll be more careful about screening participants," Marcus said finally, though the words felt like a betrayal of Emma's obvious need for connection. Watson seemed relieved. "I appreciate your understanding. The school board meets next week, and I'd prefer not to have to defend the program against concerns about dangerous participants." Driving home from school, Marcus found himself taking the long route that led past the Hartwell property. He'd looked up the address the night before, telling himself it was just curiosity. The house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, a modest ranch-style home with a well-maintained yard and an American flag hanging from the front porch. Behind the house, rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, providing perfect sight lines for long-distance shooting practice. As Marcus slowed to look at the property, he spotted Emma in the backyard. She was lying prone behind her rifle, aiming toward targets he couldn't see in the distance. Even from the road, her form looked perfect, the textbook shooting position that took most people months to master. On impulse, Marcus turned into the driveway. Emma looked up as his truck approached, and he saw her tense before recognition crossed her features. She stood slowly, rifle still in her hands, waiting as he parked and walked toward her. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Did I do something wrong yesterday?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "Why would you think that?" Emma gestured toward his truck. "You came to my house. People only do that when there's a problem." Marcus looked around the backyard, noting the professional-grade shooting bench, the spotting scope on a tripod, and the meticulous organization of equipment. This wasn't a casual hobby setup. This was a serious training facility. "Some parents were concerned about yesterday," he said honestly. "They weren't expecting to see that level of marksmanship from someone your age." Emma's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught something in her eyes, disappointment mixed with resignation. "They think I'm dangerous. They think they don't understand you," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." For the first time since he'd met her, Emma's composure cracked slightly. "My father always said that fear comes from ignorance, and ignorance comes from distance. Keep your distance from people who don't understand what you're capable of." The quote sounded like something James Hartwell might have said, the kind of hard-won wisdom that came from years of being misunderstood by civilians who couldn't grasp the realities of military service. "Is that what you've been doing?" Marcus asked. "Keeping your distance?" Emma shrugged, but Marcus could see the effort it took to maintain her indifferent facade. "It's easier that way. People can't be afraid of what they don't know about." Marcus thought about his own struggles with civilian reintegration, the way people either treated him like a hero or a potential threat, never quite seeing him as just a person. Your father was right about fear and ignorance, but he didn't account for something else. "What?" "Loneliness," Marcus said simply. "Sometimes keeping your distance costs more than dealing with people's fear." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant hills where her targets waited. "My mom wants me to quit shooting," she said finally. "She thinks it's unhealthy, that I'm too focused on something that reminds her of my father." "What do you think?" "I think shooting is the only thing I'm good at. It's the only time I feel connected to him." Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And it's the only time I feel like myself instead of just the weird girl whose father died in a training accident." Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, the recognition of someone struggling to find their place in a world that didn't quite fit. "How often do you come out here to practice?" "Every day after school. Weekends too, if the weather's good." Emma gestured toward her setup. "I keep logs of everything, weather conditions, distances, ammunition performance. My father taught me that precision requires data." "Can I see?" Emma hesitated, then walked to the shooting bench and retrieved a worn leather notebook. She handed it to Marcus reluctantly, as if sharing something deeply personal. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, dates, times, weather conditions, target distances, and shot groupings measured in fractions of inches. Marcus recognized the attention to detail that marked a serious student of marksmanship. More than that, he saw the discipline and dedication required to maintain such records for what appear to be years. "This is impressive work," he said, handing back the notebook. "Your father taught you well." "He taught me everything he could before he died," Emma replied. "But there's still so much I don't know. Techniques for different conditions, advanced ballistics calculations, equipment modifications." She trailed off, looking frustrated. Marcus made a decision that surprised him. "Would you like to learn more?" Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise, and something that might have been hope. "You would teach me?" "I could share what I know," Marcus said carefully. "But it would have to be separate from the shooting club. The other parents aren't ready to understand what you're capable of." The disappointment that crossed Emma's face was quickly hidden, but Marcus caught it. "Understand," she said. I'm used to practicing alone. You don't have to be alone, Marcus said. But you might have to be patient while other people catch up to understanding what you represent. Emma considered this, her fingers absently checking the rifle's safety mechanism. What do I represent? Marcus thought about how to answer that question honestly. Emma represented several things that made people uncomfortable. Exceptional skill in a teenage girl, dedication to something most people associated with violence, and the reality that civilians could achieve military-level proficiency through proper training and commitment. Excellence, he said finally, and most people aren't sure what to do with excellence when they encounter it unexpectedly. Over the next hour, Marcus found himself drawn into a technical discussion about long-range shooting that was unlike any conversation he'd had since leaving the military. Emma's questions were sophisticated, her understanding of ballistics and environmental factors far beyond what he'd expected. She'd clearly studied extensively, supplementing her father's teaching with research and experimentation. Have you ever competed? Marcus asked as Emma demonstrated her shooting position. No, en Mariplaive. My father planned to take me to some competitions when I turned 16, but she didn't finish the sentence. Marcus watched as Emma settled behind her rifle and prepared for a shot at a target he estimated to be roughly 500 yards away. Her pre-shot routine was flawless, checking wind indicators, adjusting for environmental conditions, controlling her breathing. When she fired, Marcus heard the distant ping of metal being struck. Dead center, Emma said after checking through her spotting scope. She said it matter-of-factly, as if hitting a 500-yard target was routine. For someone who'd spent years training military marksmen, watching Emma shoot was both impressive and troubling. Her skills were undeniable, but Marcus began to understand the parents' concerns. There was something almost mechanical about her precision, as if emotion had been completely removed from the process. Emma, he said carefully, what do you think about when you shoot? Emma looked puzzled by the question. I think about the fundamentals. Sight picture, breathing, trigger control, wind speed and direction, range estimation. Nothing else. Should I think about something else? Marcus chose his words carefully. When I was overseas, shooting was about protecting people. My squad, civilians, the mission. When I practice now, I think about the responsibility that comes with these skills. Emma was quiet for a moment. I think about my father, she said finally. About making him proud. About being worthy of what he taught me. The honesty in her voice made Marcus's chest tighten. He recognized the burden Emma was carrying, the weight of living up to a dead parent's expectations, of preserving a connection through skills that set her apart from everyone around her. Your father would be proud, Marcus said, but I think he'd also want you to have friends your own age. He'd want you to be happy. Emma's laugh was bitter. Friends my age are interested in social media and dating and college applications. They don't understand why I spend hours practicing something they think is violent and scary. Maybe they would understand if you gave them a chance, Marcus suggested. The kids at the shooting club yesterday were impressed, not scared. They were scared too, Emma said. I could see it in their faces. Marcus couldn't deny the truth of that observation. Fear and admiration had been equally present in the teenagers' reactions to Emma's demonstration. The question was whether understanding could overcome fear given enough time and the right approach. Would you be interested in helping me with the shooting club? Marcus asked suddenly. Not as a participant, but as an assistant instructor. You could help teach the fundamentals while I work with the more advanced students. Emma's eyes widened. The parents wouldn't want me around their children. The parents need to learn that excellence isn't something to fear, Marcus replied. And the students could benefit from seeing what's possible with dedication and proper training. For the first time since he'd met her, Emma smiled. It was a small, tentative expression, but it transformed her face from serious and distant to something approaching hopeful. I'd like that, she said quietly. I'd like to help. As Marcus prepared to leave, Emma walked him back to his truck. Mr. Thompson, she said as he opened the driver's door. Thank you for not being afraid of me. Marcus paused, considering his response. Emma, I've known a lot of skilled shooters. The ones who concerned me weren't the ones with exceptional ability. They were the ones who didn't understand the responsibility that came with it. You understand that responsibility. Your father made sure of that. Driving away from the Hartwell property, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since returning to civilian life, a sense of purpose that went beyond his own healing. Emma needed more than just technical instruction in marksmanship. She needed someone who understood that excellence could be isolating, that skills developed in grief could become both a blessing and a burden. More than that, she needed someone who could help her find a way to bridge the gap between her exceptional abilities and her desire for connection with peers who might never fully understand what she was capable of achieving. The next shooting club meeting was scheduled for the following week. Marcus spent the intervening days carefully planning how to integrate Emma into the program without triggering more parental concerns. It would require delicate handling, but he was beginning to believe that both Emma and the other students could benefit from the challenge of understanding each other. The question was whether Millfield was ready for a 16-year-old girl who could outshoot most professionals, or if fear would win over the possibility of growth and acceptance. The second shooting club meeting started with tension Marcus could feel in the air. Only 8 of the original 14 teenagers had returned, and their parents lingered longer than before, casting worried glances toward the equipment tables. Marcus understood their concern, but it frustrated him nonetheless. Jake Morrison was among the missing, and his absence stung more than Marcus wanted to admit. The boy had shown genuine enthusiasm and natural ability, but apparently his father had decided the club was too risky after hearing about Emma's demonstration. As Marcus began the safety briefing with the reduced group, he noticed a familiar Ford truck pulling into the gravel lot. Emma emerged carrying her rifle case, but this time she'd made an effort to appear less intimidating. Instead of her usual plain clothes, she wore a Millfield High School t-shirt and had tied her hair back in a ponytail that made her look younger, more like the other students. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus announced as Emma approached. "Today we're fortunate to have Emma Hartwell joining us as an assistant instructor. Emma has extensive training and will be helping with basic marksmanship instruction." The reaction was mixed. Sarah Beth Williams nodded politely, but Marcus caught the wariness in her expression. The Chin twins whispered to each other in Mandarin, their eyes wide as they watched Emma set down her equipment. Tommy Rodriguez looked curious, while his younger sister Maria seemed intimidated. "Before we begin with individual instruction," Marcus continued, "Emma is going to demonstrate proper shooting fundamentals. Not long-range precision shooting, but the basics that apply whether you're shooting at 20 yards or 200. Emma had clearly prepared for this moment. Instead of her military-style precision rifle, she brought a standard .22 caliber training rifle, similar to what the other students were using. Her demonstration focused on stance, grip, sight alignment, and breathing, fundamental skills that were impressive without being intimidating. The key to accurate shooting isn't strength or natural talent, Emma explained to the group, her voice steady despite the obvious nervousness behind her eyes. It's consistency. Doing the same thing exactly the same way every single time. Marcus watched the students as Emma spoke. Her technical knowledge was clear, but more importantly, her passion for the subject was beginning to show through her usual reserved demeanor. When she demonstrated proper breathing technique, her explanation was clear and patient. When she showed the correct sight picture, she made sure each student could see exactly what she meant. The breakthrough came when Maria Rodriguez, the youngest member of the group at 13, struggled with her shooting position. Emma noticed the girl's frustration before Marcus did. "May I help?" Emma asked quietly, approaching Maria with careful, non-threatening movements. Maria nodded reluctantly, and Emma knelt beside her. "Your left elbow is too far into the rifle," Emma explained gently. "It's creating tension in your shoulder. Here, try this." Emma's hands were patient and sure as she helped Maria adjust her position. Within minutes, Maria was hitting targets she'd been missing all morning, and her face lit up with excitement. "I did it," Maria exclaimed. "I actually hit the center." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. "You did that yourself. I just helped you find the right position." The ice began to break from that moment. Tommy Rodriguez asked Emma about wind estimation. Sarah Beth wanted to know about different types of ammunition. Even the Chun twins overcame their shyness to ask about the mathematics of long-range shooting. Marcus stepped back and watched Emma transform from the isolated, intimidating figure she'd been the previous week into something approaching a normal teenager, sharing knowledge with her peers. Her technical expertise remained obvious, but now it was wrapped in patience and genuine desire to help others succeed. The change in group dynamics was remarkable. Instead of competing with each other, the students began working together, with Emma serving as a bridge between Marcus's military-style instruction and their civilian perspectives. She translated his technical language into terms they could understand, and she caught errors in form or technique that Marcus missed. "Emma," Sarah Beth said during a break, "where did you learn to shoot like that? I mean, I know your father taught you, but—" Emma's expression grew serious, but not closed off as it had been before. "My father believed that anything worth doing was worth doing perfectly. He started teaching me when I was 8, but not with guns. We started with air rifles, then .22s, working up gradually as I proved I could handle the responsibility." "Wasn't it scary?" Maria asked, "learning to shoot so young?" Emma considered the question carefully. "It wasn't scary because my father never let it be scary. He taught me that the weapon was a tool, like a hammer or a wrench. Dangerous if used incorrectly, but not something to fear if you understood it completely." Tommy Rodriguez looked puzzled. "But you're so much better than everyone else. Doesn't that make it boring for you to teach basic stuff?" Emma's answer surprised Marcus. "No," she said simply. "Teaching makes me understand things I never thought about before. When I have to explain why something works, I learn it better myself." As the morning progressed, Marcus began to see possibilities he hadn't imagined. Emma's presence wasn't disrupting the group dynamic, it was elevating it. The other students pushed themselves harder when they saw what was possible with dedication and proper technique. More importantly, they began to see Emma as a person rather than just an intimidating set of skills. The real test came when Marcus announced the day's challenge, a precision shooting competition using the training rifles at 50 yards. Instead of individual competition, he divided the group into teams of 2, pairing experienced shooters with beginners. "Emma," he announced, "you'll partner with whoever needs the most help." Without hesitation, Emma chose Danny Chun, one of the twins who'd been struggling with basic rifle handling all morning. Danny looked terrified at the prospect of being paired with someone of Emma's caliber. "I'm going to mess up your score," Danny said miserably. Emma shook her head. "This isn't about my score. It's about helping you shoot better than you think you can." What followed was a masterclass in patient instruction. Emma worked with Danny on every aspect of his shooting, from stance to sight picture to trigger control. She never showed frustration when he made the same mistake repeatedly, never made him feel inadequate for not understanding something immediately. When the competition concluded, Danny's team hadn't won, but his individual improvement was dramatic. His final group of shots was tight enough to draw applause from the other students, and his grin was infectious. "I never thought I could shoot like that," Danny said, staring at his target in amazement. "You always could," Emma replied. "You just needed someone to help you find it." As parents arrived to pick up their children, Marcus noticed a subtle change in their attitudes. Instead of hurried departures and worried whispers, there were actual conversations between parents and students about what they'd learned. Maria Rodriguez excitedly showed her mother the target she'd shot, while Danny Chun demonstrated proper rifle handling for his father. Sarah Beth Williams approached Marcus as he cleaned up the equipment. "Mr. Thompson, my mother wanted me to ask about safety protocols, but honestly, I think she just wanted to know if that girl was going to be here every week." Marcus looked toward Emma, who was carefully cleaning rifles alongside the other students. "Would that concern you?" Sarah Beth considered the question seriously. "At first, yeah. She's kind of intimidating when you don't know her. But she's actually really nice, and she explains things better than most adults." "What changed your mind?" watching her with Maria and Danny. Someone who was dangerous wouldn't be that patient with beginners. Sarah Beth paused. Plus, I want to learn to shoot like that someday. Not exactly like that, because that's crazy good, but better than I am now. As Emma packed her equipment, Marcus approached her. How did that feel? Emma looked up, her expression thoughtful. Different than I expected. Better. How so? When I practice alone, shooting is just about the technical aspects. Today, it was about people. Emma paused, seeming to search for the right words. My father always said that marksmanship was about more than hitting targets. I never understood what he meant until today. Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in months. What do you think he meant? That the real skill isn't in the shooting itself. It's in understanding why the shooting matters and being able to share that understanding with others. Over the following weeks, Emma's integration into the shooting club continued to evolve. Word spread through Millfield about the teenage girl who could outshoot professionals, but the stories were changing. Instead of fear and concern, there was growing respect and curiosity. The club's membership began to grow again as students returned and brought friends. Jake Morrison came back, sheepishly admitting that he'd missed the challenge of pushing himself to improve. New students arrived, drawn by stories of exceptional instruction and a supportive learning environment. Emma's role evolved naturally from assistant instructor to something approaching a peer mentor. She developed a teaching style that was uniquely her own, patient, thorough, and focused on helping each student find their own path to improvement rather than trying to make them copies of herself. The transformation wasn't limited to the shooting club. Marcus began to notice Emma in other contexts around town, at the hardware store with her mother, at the diner with classmates from school. She still carried herself with the same precise posture, but there was something different in her demeanor. She seemed less isolated, more connected to the world around her. The real breakthrough came during the club's fourth meeting, when Tommy Rodriguez brought his grandfather to observe. The old man was a Korean War veteran who'd been skeptical of civilian shooting programs, but curious about his grandson's enthusiasm. "So you're the girl everyone's talking about," the grandfather said to Emma during a break. Emma nodded politely. "Yes, sir. My grandson says you can outshoot most Marines." "I've had good training," Emma replied diplomatically. The old veteran studied Emma for a long moment. "Your father was James Hartwell." It wasn't a question, and Emma's posture straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. I knew men like your father in Korea. Quiet professionals who did their job without making a fuss about it." The grandfather's voice carried respect. The best of them understood that their skills were meant to protect people, not intimidate them. Emma's eyes brightened. "That's exactly what my father taught me. Then he taught you well. And from what I see here today, you're honoring his memory by passing that wisdom on to others." Marcus watched Emma's face as the old veteran's words sank in. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly at peace with herself and her abilities. That afternoon, as the shooting club session ended and students began to leave, Emma approached Marcus with something he'd never seen from her before, excitement that wasn't carefully controlled. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I've been thinking about what you said about competitions." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What about them? I'd like to try one, not just for myself, but with some of the students from the club. As a team." The idea was intriguing. Marcus had participated in civilian shooting competitions during his military career and knew they could be excellent learning experiences. But he also understood the challenges of introducing a group of novice shooters to competitive environments. "What kind of competition did you have in mind?" Emma pulled out her ever-present notebook, filled with research she'd clearly been conducting on her own time. "There's a regional precision shooting match in 3 months. They have team divisions for different skill levels and some categories specifically for youth competitors." Marcus examined the information Emma had compiled. The competition was well-regarded, professionally run, and included safety protocols that met his standards. More importantly, it would give the students something to work toward beyond just weekly practice sessions. "This is ambitious," he said finally. "Most of these students have been shooting for less than a month. Emma's expression grew determined. They've been improving faster than anyone expected, and I think having a goal would motivate them to work even harder. Marcus looked around the warehouse at the targets riddled with holes from the day's practice, at the equipment that had become familiar to a group of teenagers who'd started as complete novices. Emma was right about their improvement. Several of the students were already shooting better than he'd expected after months of training. "You be willing to compete alongside beginners?" Marcus asked. "Your skills are already at a professional level." Emma's smile was confident, but not arrogant. "Mr. Thompson, 3 months ago, I thought competitive shooting was about proving how good I was compared to other people. Now, I understand it's about proving how good we can be when we work together." As Marcus watched Emma walk to her truck, her rifle case slung over her shoulder with familiar ease, he realized that something fundamental had shifted. The isolated girl who'd approached their first meeting with desperate loneliness had become someone who understood that true marksmanship was about more than individual achievement. She'd learned what her father had tried to teach her from the beginning, that the most important target wasn't on any range, but in the connections between people who shared a common purpose. The shooting competition was still 3 months away, but Marcus suspected the real victory had already been won. Emma had found her place not just as an exceptional shooter, but as a young woman who could bridge the gap between excellence and community, between skills that intimidated and wisdom that inspired. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Marcus felt genuinely optimistic about the future, both Emma's and his own. The morning of the regional precision shooting competition dawned clear and crisp, with barely a breath of wind stirring the flags at the Crawford County Shooting Complex. Marcus arrived early to scout the facilities and prepare the equipment, but he found Emma already there, methodically checking rifles and organizing ammunition with the same precision she brought to everything else. "Nervous?" Marcus asked as he approached her setup area. Emma looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. "Excited," she corrected. "I've been waiting for this my whole life without realizing it." The rest of the Millfield team arrived over the next hour, their nervous energy palpable despite months of preparation. Sarah Beth Williams clutched her rifle case with white knuckles, while the Chen twins chattered rapidly in Mandarin. Tommy Rodriguez bounced on his toes, unable to stand still, and his sister Maria looked pale but determined. Jake Morrison, who'd become one of Emma's most dedicated students since returning to the club, surveyed the professional shooting complex with wide eyes. "This is so much bigger than I expected," he murmured. Emma moved among the group with calm confidence, offering technical reminders and words of encouragement. Her transformation over the past 3 months had been remarkable to witness. The isolated girl who'd first appeared at their warehouse practice session had become a leader, someone the other students turned to naturally for guidance and support. "Remember," Emma told the group as they prepared for the team registration, "we're not here to compete against the other teams. We're here to shoot better than we've ever shot before together." The competition featured teams from across 3 states, ranging from high school JROTC programs with military-style precision to civilian shooting clubs with decades of experience. The Millfield team drew curious stares as they set up their equipment. They were younger than most groups, led by a teenage girl who handled herself with professional competence and representing a town most competitors had never heard of. Marcus had entered the team in the intermediate division, despite Emma's skills qualifying her for advanced competition. It had been her suggestion, based on her desire to compete alongside her students rather than against seasoned professionals who might intimidate the newer shooters. The first stage of competition was precision shooting at known distances, ranging from 100 to 300 yards. Each team member would fire 5 rounds at each distance, with scores based on total accuracy and consistency. Emma volunteered to shoot last, allowing her teammates to establish the team's baseline performance before she added her contributions. It was a tactical decision, but Marcus recognized it as something deeper, Emma putting the team's confidence ahead of her own scoring opportunities. Sarah Beth Williams shot first, and her performance was solid if unspectacular. 3 months of intensive training had transformed her from a casual hunter's daughter into a competent precision shooter, and her groupings were tight enough to earn respectful nods from competitors at adjacent firing lines. The Chun twins followed, and their scores reflected the steady improvement they'd made through dedicated practice and Emma's patient instruction. Danny, in particular, shot far better than anyone had expected when he'd first picked up a rifle, his face lighting up with each successful shot. Tommy Rodriguez struggled with stage nerves, his first few shots scattering wider than his usual practice performance. Marcus saw Emma lean close to offer quiet encouragement, reminding Tommy of breathing techniques they practiced. His final shots pulled together beautifully, salvaging a respectable score. Maria Rodriguez surprised everyone, including herself. The youngest member of the team shot with steady confidence, her small frame perfectly suited to the precision shooting positions Emma had helped her develop. Her final group, at 300 yards, was tight enough to draw applause from nearby competitors. Jake Morrison shot with the aggressive confidence that had initially attracted Marcus to his potential. His scores were among the team's highest, and his obvious enjoyment of the competitive environment energized the rest of the group. Finally, it was Emma's turn. As she settled into position behind her rifle, Marcus noticed the subtle change that came over her. The friendly, encouraging teammate disappeared, replaced by the focused precision shooter he'd first encountered months ago. But there was a difference now. Where once Emma's shooting had seemed almost mechanical in its perfection, now it carried an emotional weight. Each shot was fired not just for accuracy, but as a statement about what the team had accomplished together. Her performance was flawless. 5 shots at 100 yards created a single ragged hole in the target center. At 200 yards, her group could be covered with a quarter. At 300 yards, her 5 shots clustered in a space smaller than a silver dollar. The silence from adjacent firing lines was telling. Professional competitors stopped their own preparation to watch Emma shoot, recognizing a level of skill that was exceptional even in this environment. When she finished, the applause was genuine and respectful. "How does it feel?" asked a competitor from a neighboring team. "To have a shooter of that caliber on your squad?" Jake Morrison answered before Marcus could respond. "Emma's not just our best shooter. She's the reason we're all shooting better than we ever thought possible." The comment drew curious looks from other competitors, who were beginning to understand that the Millfield team dynamic was unusual. Instead of being built around individual star performers, they functioned as a genuine unit, with Emma's excellence lifting everyone rather than overshadowing them. The afternoon stage involved unknown distance shooting, where teams had to estimate ranges and adjust for environmental conditions without assistance from spotting scopes or rangefinders. This was where Emma's extensive training and natural ability became most apparent. Working as the team's primary range estimator, Emma moved between shooting positions, offering distance calculations and wind readings to her teammates. Her estimates proved remarkably accurate, allowing even the less experienced shooters to connect with targets they might otherwise have missed entirely. But more than technical assistance, Emma provided calm leadership that kept the team focused despite the pressure of competition and the intimidating skill level of some competing teams. When Danny Chun struggled with a particularly challenging target, Emma talked him through the sight picture and breathing technique as if they were back at the warehouse for a casual practice session. "Trust your fundamentals," she reminded him quietly. "The target doesn't know this is a competition." Danny's shot found the scoring ring, and his whoop of excitement drew smiles from competitors throughout the firing line. Emma's answering grin was pure joy, clearly more pleased with her teammate's success than she would have been with her own perfect score. As the competition progressed, Marcus began to notice something unexpected. Other teams were watching the Millfield group with interest that went beyond curiosity about Emma's shooting ability. Their supportive dynamic, the obvious camaraderie between team members, and Emma's role as both star performer and dedicated mentor was drawing positive attention from competitors and officials alike. During a break between stages, an older man approached Marcus. He wore the jacket of a military shooting team and carried himself with the bearing of a career soldier. Sergeant Major Williams, retired, the man introduced himself. "I've been watching your team, and I'm impressed." Marcus shook the offered hand. "Thank you. They've worked hard to get here." Williams nodded toward Emma, who was helping Maria Rodriguez adjust her scope settings. "That young woman reminds me of some of the best shooters I worked with during my career. But what impresses me most isn't her marksmanship." "What do you mean?" "I've seen a lot of naturally gifted shooters over the years. Most of them are focused solely on their own performance. Your shooter, there is more concerned with making everyone around her better." Williams paused, watching Emma demonstrate proper shooting position to one of the Chin twins. "That's the mark of someone who understands what marksmanship is really about." The final stage of competition was a team challenge requiring all members to engage targets simultaneously at varying distances. Coordination and communication were as important as individual shooting skills, and the Millfield team's months of practice together showed clearly. Emma positioned herself at the longest distance while assigning her teammates to targets that matched their skill levels. Her quiet commands coordinated their timing, ensuring that all 6 shooters engaged their targets within the required time window. The result was a nearly flawless performance that placed the Millfield team among the top finishers in their division. More importantly, every team member had performed at or above their best practice scores, demonstrating that they belonged at this level of competition. As scores were tallied and awards prepared, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. 3 months earlier, most of these students had never fired a rifle. Emma had been an isolated teenager whose exceptional skills seemed more burden than blessing. Now, they were a cohesive team that had competed successfully against experienced shooters from across multiple states. Emma had found her place not as a solitary prodigy, but as a leader who could inspire others to exceed their own expectations. The awards ceremony confirmed what Marcus had suspected throughout the day. The Millfield team placed second in their division, a remarkable achievement for such a new program. Individual recognition went to several team members, but Emma received a special award for sportsmanship and leadership. As she accepted the trophy, Emma's speech was brief but heartfelt. 3 months ago, I thought competitive shooting was about proving how good you were as an individual. This team taught me it's actually about discovering how good you can become when you work together toward a common goal. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, reflecting the respect the Millfield team had earned throughout the day. During the drive home, the team's excitement was infectious. Plans for future competitions mixed with replays of the day's best shots and promises to maintain their training schedule through the winter months. Emma participated fully in the conversation, but Marcus caught moments when she stared out the window with a thoughtful expression. "Regrets about not competing in the advanced division?" Marcus asked quietly during a stop for gas. Emma shook her head. "No regrets at all. I learned more about shooting today than I have in years of solo practice." "How so?" Emma considered her answer carefully. "When you shoot alone, success or failure is entirely individual. Today I learned that the best shots aren't necessarily the most accurate ones. They're the ones that help your team succeed." As they pulled back into Millfield after dark, the warehouse that served as their practice facility looked humble compared to the professional complex they'd left behind. But Marcus realized it represented something more valuable than fancy equipment or perfect conditions. It was the place where a group of teenagers had learned not just to shoot accurately, but to work together, support each other, and find strength in shared purpose. It was where Emma Hartwell had discovered that her exceptional skills were most meaningful when used to elevate others. Over the following weeks, word of the team's success spread through Millfield and beyond. The local newspaper ran a feature story, and inquiries came from other towns interested in starting their own youth shooting programs. Emma found herself invited to speak at schools and community organizations about firearm safety and the values of competitive shooting. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. A package arrived at the Hartwell home addressed to Emma, containing a worn leather journal and a letter written in careful script. The letter was from James Hartwell's former commanding officer, who had heard about Emma's competition performance through military networks. The journal contained her father's training notes and observations about marksmanship instruction, written during his years as a Marine shooting instructor. "Your father would be proud," the letter concluded. "He always believed that the true measure of a marksman wasn't in individual achievement, but in the ability to pass on knowledge and values to the next generation. For what I hear, you've honored his memory in the best possible way." Marcus was present when Emma received the package, and he watched emotions play across her face as she read her father's words. For the first time since her father's death, Emma seemed truly at peace with his legacy and her own path forward. "He knew," she said quietly, looking up from the journal. Somehow he knew that the shooting was never really about the shooting itself. What was it about? Emma's smile was radiant with understanding. It was about becoming the kind of person who could handle something difficult and dangerous and use it to make other people better instead of just making yourself feared. As winter settled over Millfield and the shooting club moved to indoor facilities, Emma's role continued to evolve. She was no longer just a silent girl with extraordinary skills, but a young woman who had found her voice through teaching others and discovered her strength through lifting up her teammates. The journey that had begun with a shouted question, "Any sharpshooters here?" had led to something none of them had expected. Not just improved marksmanship or competitive success, but a genuine community built around shared challenges, mutual support, and the understanding that excellence was most meaningful when it brought people together rather than setting them apart. Emma Hartwell had finally found her place in the world, not despite her exceptional abilities, but because she had learned to use them in service of something larger than herself. In teaching others to shoot, she had discovered her own target, the challenging but rewarding work of helping people become better than they ever imagined possible. The silent girl had found her voice, and in doing so, had helped others find theirs as well.